I want to now bring your attention to the fourth man that was in the same location. It was later discovered that this same guy, ladies and gentlemen, is a user. Now, the MP for Madeleine McCann's family is calling for the prime suspect in their daughter's disappearance to be extradited to the UK if, wait for it, significant evidence is in place to bring him to trial. And that's the problem. There isn't significant evidence proving Christian Brueckner had anything to do with this. So why, after 20 years, ladies and gentlemen, do the UK police and do the German police believe that Christian Brueckner is the man behind the murder, the disappearance, the abduction of Madeleine McCann? Why? That's what we're going to find out today. I've actually discovered something extremely interesting that I do want to bring to your attention, because we're familiar with 3 faces that were also in the locality of Portugal when Madeleine went missing. But now there's a fourth, another man. There's an extremely disturbed individual, and I don't understand how someone like him, as well as the other 3 people that we know were in that locality, why they were never deemed as suspects. You know what? We're going to get into it, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start with Christian Brueckner. Why is Christian Brueckner the #1 suspect? First, we have to start by saying Christian Brueckner is an absolutely disgusting, vile character. Christian Brueckner, the man we now need to pay attention to in order to understand why he is the #1 suspect. Let's start with the heinous crimes that Christian Brueckner committed, the reasons as to why he is one of the suspects for the Madeleine McCann case. It actually takes us back to before Madeleine McCann went missing. Before Madeleine McCann had disappeared, Christian Brueckner was already known as a predator. He was a victim from Ireland, a young woman who went by the name of Helge B. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. In 2004, while working as a holiday representative in Praia da Roca in Portugal, she was violently raped at knife point in her apartment by a masked intruder. She is certain it was Christian Brueckner. Mrs. Bayham was 20 years old at the time. She testified that the attacker climbed into her apartment, woke her by name, so he knew her by name, and subjected her to hours of brutal violence. Extremely disturbing. She vividly recalled the attacker's piercing blue eyes, which she later identified as Christian Brueckner's. She believed they belonged to Christian after seeing his photo in news coverage related to Madeleine McCann's case. So we're talking 4 or 5 years after this ordeal was taking place, this poor lady Hazel had triggered memories from seeing pictures of Christian Brueckner being linked to the Madeleine McCann case. And she knew the moment she saw his face, it was him. It was 100% him. The situation that took place with Hazel, as far as I'm aware, is the first victim. And that also has a story within itself because there was an aftermath. But this is when Christian was acquitted. He was literally set free. There wasn't enough evidence to support the claims being made by Hazel and the other allegations that were being made against him as well. This is where it gets extremely interesting because the German prosecuting service, they believe the judge of that case mishandled the evidence. And this is the reason why Christian Brueckner was set free. He was allowed to leave and the case was more or less thrown in the bin. Although there was a statement, and this is the statement that's extremely interesting, a statement that was given by a close confidant of Christian Brueckner. He goes by the name of Helge B. He's another German international. And his story, I have to say, is extremely questionable. And I believe it's this man right here, Helge B. He is the reason as to why the UK police as well as the German police believe that Christian Brueckner is 100% responsible for the abduction, disappearance, or the murder of Madeleine McCann. This is the man that stood up on the same trial and he gave evidence. But the only problem is he didn't have evidence. All he had was his statement. He was hoping that being a close confidant of Christian Brueckner, that the judge and the jury would take his word as gospel. Now, when it comes to Helge's statement, I have to question it. There's red flags in the statement. And it's probably one of the reasons why the judge, and I'm only making this assumption, my opinion, the judge didn't take it seriously. He didn't take it seriously, or she didn't take it seriously. Whoever the judge was just didn't take it seriously. And it's based on the red flags that come within the story. And let me explain. Now, firstly, after all of the research that I've done, I don't believe there was enough at the time for the judge and the jury to convict Christian Brueckner based on Hazel saying she could tell it was Christian Brueckner just based on the eyes. Remember, he broke into a home wearing a mask. How many people are gonna have piercing blue eyes. You're not gonna really be able to identify someone through a mask via their eyes. The statement from Helge, who is a close confidant of Christian Brueckner, has in my opinion encouraged the German police as well as the UK police to pursue Christian as the main suspect. But for some reason, I feel like Helge isn't being entirely truthful. Now, Helge alleges when he heard Christian went to prison, him and a group of guys went to go and rob his house. So he's gone to rob Christian's house. Tell me why, I don't know. But he wants to go and rob Christian's house. When he gets there, the door is already open. So when they've entered the property, he claims at this point that the place had already been ransacked. So someone else has robbed Christian's gaff. That's what he's claiming. However, he said that there were items still worth stealing after the ransack. But now let's look at the items that he stole. He stole a camera, gasoline, and a gun. We don't know how many liters of gasoline. Is gasoline really worth stealing? Is a gun really worth stealing? Is a camera really worth stealing? Now think about it. Those three items are the items that he claims he stole from Christian's property. I don't think any of those items are worth stealing. Another thing I have to question is if someone else ransacked the house before they did, why would they leave behind the gun? It would have made sense for them to leave a camera because a camera isn't worth stealing. But for some reason, Helge wants to steal the camera. So they're the three items that Helge leaves with. And what he decides to do is sell all of the items, including the camera. But he alleges that on the camera, there were videos. In fact, I'm pretty sure he says there were about 20 tapes altogether. But he decided to sell them. So there was no evidence of these tapes. There was no evidence to prove what he says he saw on these cameras or on these tapes were actually on there. He doesn't have that evidence. Again, everything that Helge is saying, he's basically saying, trust me, bro. Trust me, bro. It's a trust me, bro one. Bearing in mind, Helge's coming forward off the back of the Madeleine McCann case. Okay, we know Madeleine McCann is a hot cake case. There's money involved in the Madeleine McCann case. We know how much money the UK police have pumped into it. We know there was rewards being given out. You have to use that context and apply that context to why Helge potentially come forward. And the reason I say that is because when Helge was asked to explain what he saw in those tapes, there was only 2 incidences he could talk about. I also want to give more context at this point. Helge is Christian Brueckner's friend. Christian Brueckner boasted and blabbered to friends and other people in his circle about the 2 incidences that he filmed. Now, one of those incidences is the 72-year-old, but the other incident was a young 20-year-old, and that would have been poor Hazel. They were the 2 incidences that Christian Brueckner was involved in. He knows he was involved in them because he blabbed about them. So the only problem is, Hazel never got justice. That's the problem, because one of the victims he was blabbering about was 100% Hazel. The reason I can say that for sure is because Helge basically told us that in court. The 2 incidences he describes that he saw on the tapes was Hazel and the 72-year-old victim. The 2 that Christian was blabbering about. So being a close confidant of Christian who knows he's involved in those type of antics, is it possible to believe at this point that Helge could have known about those 2 victims without seeing the camera footage, without seeing those tapes? Because it's weird how, out of the 20 tapes that he claims were there, that he took, that he stole from the property, it's weird how we can only describe the 2 that Christian Brueckner was blabbing about. See, if Helge would have had the tapes, if he would have took that footage directly to the court, maybe he could have got justice for Hazel. But he didn't, and therefore we can't really take his statement as gospel. But being a close confidant of Christian Brueckner, we could say at this point, we could say that he would know about the 2 victims that Christian Brueckner did attack, Hazel and the 72-year-old, because he was a close friend to Christian Brueckner. And maybe, just maybe, off the back of this Madeleine McCann situation taking place, blowing up, not only do we have Hazel eventually coming forward to say she believes Christian Brueckner would have attacked her, which she was right about, but secondly, we would have had someone who told us he went to someone's house to rob and steal. He went there to rob and steal from a PDF, someone he knew was a PDF. But I think the reason why Helge come forward was because of the Madeleine McCann case, not because he was trying to help Hazel. He just thought because he had information on Hazel it could help him arrest Christian Brueckner for Madeleine McCann, and therefore he gets paid the reward money. See, I don't believe Helge would have had any tapes or saw any footage. I believe he would have known that Hazel was telling the truth. And although a part of him maybe wanted to help Hazel get justice, the main part of him was the reward money for Madeleine McCann. If it was his testimony that was going to get Christian Brueckner arrested, charged, and sent to jail for Madeleine McCann, then he would have been rewarded handsomely. Not only from the McCanns, but also from interviews and X, Y, and Z. We know how it goes. And this is my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, based on everything that I've looked at. But it's that link and that connection and that testimony that gives the German as well as the UK police the confidence to believe Christian Brueckner is responsible for whatever happened to Madeleine McCann. But it's not entirely true, because there was an agenda behind Helge, in my opinion. And that was the reward money. The story that he gave, the statement he gave, makes no sense. It doesn't tell me this is a person that's out to help victims. You are someone that was running around with PDF, disgusting men, and most people would be compelled to believe that if you are a part of that same circle, you probably have the same type of mindset. So I can't trust you coming forward with a story about going to a PDF's house after telling us you are his friend, and you went there because you heard he went jail and you wanted to rob the place. You wanted to rob the place, and the only thing you left with was a camera, a gun, and gasoline. And on this camera, all you can describe is 2 victims out of the 20 tapes you claim they had, without actually proving that you have the physical tapes or footage of this horrific ordeal or these horrific ordeals. So at this point, although he's come forward to help Hazel with a really grey story, a really questionable story, the real reason behind it, the real motivation behind it is the reward money for the Madeleine McCann case. Again, there isn't enough evidence to prove that Christian Brueckner did what they claim he did to Madeleine McCann. In fact, Christian Brueckner was seen a year ago in an internet cafe, whereby he was telling this guy in an internet cafe that he's got information that could blow the Madeleine McCann case wide open. Christian Brueckner, how does he have that? Very interesting stuff. We're probably gonna have to talk about that in another video. Another reason why they believe that Christian Brueckner is responsible is because the authorities in Portugal, who some say haven't done their job correctly, that in the area where Madeleine McCann was abducted, there's only a small minority, at least 1% of those type of criminals in that area. Only 1%. Only 1% of that type of criminal would be in this area at this time of day. But based on that statistic, because Christian Brueckner's phone pinged within a mile radius of that location, they're pinning it on him. So that is something else that is compelling the German and the UK police to believe that Christian Brueckner is responsible. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing, as far as I've seen online. There could be things behind the scenes that we just don't know about. But if there was, the German police would have had no problem with extraditing Christian Brueckner, or at least receiving that evidence, that information, and trialing him again in Germany. The German police have received all of the evidence and all of the information from the UK police after a recent 6-month secret investigation, and they still believe there isn't enough there. There isn't enough. It's all assumptions based on circumstantial evidence. It's not concrete enough. And therefore, case is more or less in the bin. Now, me personally, I don't believe Christian Brueckner has anything to do with Madeleine McCann's disappearance. That's just my opinion. I want to now bring your attention to the 4th man that was in the same location, that was living in a villa close to where the McCanns were staying. It was later discovered that this same guy, ladies and gentlemen, is a user. It even gets even more creepier. Listen to this. So I found this article, ladies and gentlemen. This was published in 2016. The headline for this one is ex-MP accused of befriended McCanns after Madeleine disappearance. Kate and Jerry McCann said they were horrified last night as it was claimed the late Sir Clement Freud, who befriended them in Praia de Luz after their daughter Madeleine McCann disappeared, was a abuser. Now listen to this. 2 women have drastically come forward claiming that Sir Clement them when they were children. The celebrated broadcaster and former MP who died in 2009, he died in 2009, An unexpected death, they say. Literally a year after the Madeleine McCann disappearance, right? He had a villa in the same location of where Madeleine McCann disappeared. After the little girl vanished, he invited the parents around to his villa. He was bizarrely teasing Kate McCann about whether she was a nymphomaniac. If you actually understand what a nymphomaniac is, so nymphomania is a mental disorder marked by a compulsive sexual behavior. Compulsions are unwanted actions or rituals that a person engages in repeatedly without getting pleasure from them or being able to control them. Why would Clement Freud ask Kate McCann if she's a nymphomaniac? What are we talking about? It's extremely weird to hear that process taking place while Madeleine's missing. You live in the area, you're a user, you hear about Madeleine McCann going missing, so you invite the parents to your villa in the same location. And the parents go. Like, instead of focusing on looking for Madeleine, you're going to a PDF's house, and you don't even know at the time he's a PDF. It says here there was no sign that his name featured in the botched Portuguese police investigation, and the Metropolitan Police, which launched Operation Grange in 2011 to re-examine the Madeleine case, never said anything about him either. Now, when you think about what the Portuguese police conveys to the German police, the reasons why Christian Brueckner could be the only suspects in the location, it makes you think, well, they must have been covering up something. Like, was it the Portuguese police that was covering something up? They clearly knew the likes of Clement the Fraud was living in the locality. Is it a coincidence that he lives in that locality, like really close by to where they were staying? And we also get images of the other three people that were seen in the same location, one of them being Ghislaine Maxwell. And then the fact that this Clement the Fraud wants to invite the McCanns over to his villa makes me feel like he personally invited them over to find out how they really feel, what they're thinking, so he could cover up his tracks, allegedly. I mean, that would make sense. That, personally, would make more sense than the whole Christian Brueckner thing. The only problem we have is that line of inquiry was never investigated. It was never looked at. Look, to be quite fair, ladies and gentlemen, after going through all of that, do I believe Christian Brueckner is the perpetrator, responsible for what's happened to Madeleine McCann? No. Although Christian Brueckner was a vile and disgusting guy and committed some heinous crimes, I don't think he's clever enough to pull off something like this. Pull off a disappearance to the point where the body doesn't even get found. Let alone a confession, let alone not blabbering to people that he knows about stealing this kid and, you know, doing whatever he'd done to this kid. This guy was a blabber. He spoke about his crimes to his friends. See, there was another incident that Christian Brueckner found himself in with a minor, and I believe he was flashing himself to a minor on a beach. Disgusting stuff. But that doesn't mean he's qualified to get away with something like this. The only people that are really qualified to get away with things like this are people with money, people in positions of power. Do you understand? Any local street criminal would have either blabbed about this or they would have been sloppy. Sloppy to the point where they would have been caught. The body would have been found. Something would have happened by now, in my opinion. If it was a sloppy criminal, they would have been caught by now. There would have been evidence to prove that they did that shit. And in my opinion, Christian Brueckner is a sloppy criminal because he's been caught for all three things that he was involved in. Yes, he got acquitted for one of those things. That's because there wasn't enough evidence. But I believe Hazel. I believe Hazel was telling the truth. The reason why I believe Hazel was telling the truth is because Helge come forward and he more or less painted the same picture as Hazel without actually speaking to Hazel. So that told me that Helge knew it was his friends that committed the crime because his friend blabbed about it. And that is my opinion. That is the conclusion that I've come to just based on this aspect of the story. So much more to go through, ladies and gentlemen. I need you lot to stick around. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Most importantly, leave all of those thoughts and all of those comments down below. I know there's a lot of people that are really invested in this case. It's almost been 20 years, ladies and gentlemen. 20 years. Crazy. But leave those thoughts and comments down below. Let me know exactly what you're thinking. Turn your notification bells on so you don't miss out on future videos. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.